Hello, namaste, welcome to the next episode of Upadeṣa-Undiyar. This one is kind of tricky, so I'm going to have to rely on my notes a lot. I hope you don't mind me reading off of the notes, because in this episode we're going to go into verses 8 through 10. And this is where Rāmana introduces the philosophy of Advaita. Advaita means non-duality. That doesn't mean oneness. The opposite of two is not one. The opposite of two is indeterminate. Advaita. Some people try to read it into oneness, but that's really not correct. So let's summarize these verses 8 through 10. First of all, in verse 8, Rāmana says that rather than meditating on God as different from oneself, one should meditate on God as being oneself. In other words, God within us. Like that. So this is the key to explaining how niṣkāmya-karma and bhakti ultimately lead to meditation on the self, Brahman. In the next verse, he declares that the actual meaning of bhakti is to concentrate and worship one's own self. In the next verse, verse 9, Bhagavan declares that the real meaning of bhakti is to concentrate on and worship God as oneself. And this is the actual meaning of parā-bhakti, the supreme bhakti, highest bhakti. In verse 10, he concludes that to abide in the self is transcendental to meditation. And this is the real aim of not only karma-yoga, niṣkāmya-karma yoga, but also bhakti-yoga, jñāna-yoga, and rāja-yoga. So in other words, the principle of Advaita unifies all the paths of yoga into one. Now, normally we have the adherents of different types of yoga being very sectarian and trying to prove that their particular path is the best. But actually, just like one can approach a mountain from the north, from the east, from the south, or from the west, these four major paths of yoga, karma-yoga, bhakti-yoga, raja-yoga, dhyāna-yoga, are actually simply different paths to reach the same point. And that point is aham brahmasmi, soham, I am Brahman, I am that. Brahman is the self. Well, look at it from the other point of view. Brahman is everything. So if Brahman is everything and within everything and is the root substance of all existences, then Brahman is in us too. And if there is something that appears to be different from Brahman, that is illusion. So that is the main point of Advaita philosophy. Not that it's all one. That's a distortion and an oversimplification. Because as we'll see later, well, I don't want to give away my big conclusion yet. So let's go into the verses one by one. First, verse 8. Rather than ananya-bhāva, ananya-bhāva, done with the conviction he is I, is indeed the best among all the various kinds of meditation. So anya means something else. Anya means God is different from the self. Now, all the various religious paths, including the paths of bhakti, meditation, and so on, done as a religious path, hold that the self and God are different. So rather than use the loaded term God, I prefer the term Brahman, because Brahman does not have all the philosophical, theological, and traditional baggage that comes along with the word God. God is a very anthropomorphic term. It conjures up an image of an old man in the sky looking disapprovingly at everybody and ready anytime to send somebody to hell for eternity. It's a horrible idea. God isn't like that at all. God is, in Advaita conception, one's very self, the innermost core, the most inner of the inward. So, in that conception, then God is within everyone and everything that exists is part of God. So, I'll be expanding on this image and this idea a little bit later in the video. So an important point that he brings up here is that one should not meditate on the thought, I am God. Because anything that's a thought is different from the thing that's thought about. Just like words. Words are different from the things they represent. Of course, some people identify or objectify words, and they try to make different words the real things that they talk about, but they're not. Really, they're just symbols. So, we shouldn't be attached to words, and in the same way, we shouldn't be attached to ideas. Even important ideas like I am that, or he is I, or any of the Mahavakyas, or great sayings of the Vedas. These are only to guide our meditations. So if we're not supposed to meditate on the thought, then what are we supposed to meditate on? The experience. The experience that I am consciousness. I am Brahman. I am the root substance of everything that be. And that will bring us to the experience of I am he, I am that, and so on, that the Vedas are pointing towards. Remember, any idea, any word is only a pointer towards something real. And so we shouldn't get all hung up on the pointer, but go and take a look at the experience that it points to. That's the real purpose of meditation. Because after all, we can't be in meditation 24 hours a day. Can't sit there with our eyes closed and ignore the real world. We still have to eat, work, and so on. So what is the point of meditation then? It's simply to establish in us the right view. And once that right view is established, then there's no more need for meditation. We actually transcend meditation. And we get to a state that's called post-meditation. More on that in just a minute. So finally, in this verse also Bhagavan reveals how these four yogas become one. Because each of them is simply a pointer toward a certain experience. That experience is the experience of the self. Self with a capital S. So next, verse 9. By the strength of such ananya-bhāva, or self-inquiry, abiding in the state of being, which transcends meditation, alone is the truth of supreme devotion. So if God, Brahman, the Supreme, is everything, and is in everything, and it's also in us and is us, then to meditate on the self is the supreme devotion. To meditate on some symbol like a deity or a name or an idea about God is secondary or tertiary to meditating on the self. And in this way, all the paths of yoga become one. So this is the real practice. All the yogas are aiming at is simply abiding in the self. This abiding in the self is extremely pleasant. I discovered it one day. I remember I was sitting on a park bench in Mexico City. And I was thinking, what am I really? I'm consciousness, right? So what if I just become conscious of consciousness? And I started looking at myself, contemplating myself. I'm different from the body. I'm different from the mind. I'm pure consciousness. I am the light that illuminates all these objects and allows me to sense the world, to experience the life. And I began to get so happy, so blissful, just from thinking about it, actually, and then actually doing it, actually turning around the mind to look at itself, to think of itself, turning around the consciousness to peer in at itself. This is a very, very pleasant experience, and it only gets better as we get deeper into it. So this idea that he is I is in the beginning a conviction. It is more or less an assumption. God is myself? It seems a little bit counterintuitive at first, because after all, myself is different from other people's self, apparently. And on the surface, it seems like, well, we should all be separate and different, right? But if God was everybody and in everything, wouldn't we all be the same? Well, not necessarily. Well, we'll get to that later too. What it really means is that we are qualitatively identical, pure consciousness, pure being. And that all of us are looking out through different mirrors, different lenses at the world. And those lenses color the world differently for each of us. The mirrors reflect differently, although the nature of a mirror is always the same. It reflects different scenes depending on what's placed in front of it. So even though consciousness is the same in everyone, it reflects the different objects that it encounters and appears to be different. But it's not the mirror, it's what it's reflecting that's different. So, what results from this practice of ananya-bhāva, of self-reflection or self-contemplation, is that the meditator disappears. There's no more subject-object dichotomy. If I'm meditating on myself, the subject and the object are the same. There's no more duality, non-duality. See? And then one realizes that, well, the quality of consciousness in me isn't different from the quality of consciousness in anything else. So again, there's no difference between myself and another self. Again, non-duality. So this leads to some very interesting experiences and conclusions. Oh, and finally, since God, or Brahman, is nothing but the real self in everything, that this kind of meditation, this kind of experience or contemplation is the highest form of yoga. Verse 10. Abiding, having subsided in the place of arising, in one's source, the real self. That is karma, desireless action, and bhakti, devotion. That is yoga, union with God, and jnana, true knowledge. So this is the practice that transcends meditation. And by this practice, the mind, or the self with a small s, the ego, becomes merged in the place of its arising. Ego emerges from mind, and mind arises from consciousness. And consciousness arises from Brahman. So when we settle the small self with a small s in the great self with a capital S, Brahman, then this individuality, this separateness, the existence of the doer comes to an end. And so this is the state of no mind, non-doing, enlightenment, nirvana, whatever you want to call it, salvation, moksha. This is the state that all the yogas, all the spiritual disciplines aim at. So, of course, they create a spectrum of many different stages. But here, Rāmana is focusing on the ultimate stage, the stage where one realizes the final insight. And what is that insight? Well, we talked before about consciousness being like a mirror, right? So, if I'm on this side of the mirror, I can see the objects reflected in the mirror. And I say, oh, that mirror is reflecting those objects. But if I go on the other side of the mirror, then I become aware of the source of those objects and the mirror itself. Just like a one-way mirror. You know, you can see through a one-way mirror from this side, but not from this side. So from this side, it looks like an ordinary mirror, and you can't see through to the other side. But when you're on the other side of it, you can see through it. So you can see not only the objects being reflected in it, but you can see the mirror itself and know that the mirror is actually yourself. So namaste, Om Tat Sat, Om Harihi Om.